If you ever had a stack of common cards that you had no idea what to do with, or maybe you had a card art that you really liked, then this is a video for you. Because today's video is on how to make 3D card art using common cards that you had lying around. So what is 3D card art, right? In the most basic way I could explain it is whenever you have a trading card, no matter what it is, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh for example, what you're going to do is you're going to hollow out and cut out the squares of where the art is. And when you stack them all together in a stack like this and you glue them together, what happens is you're going to have this effect where it looks like there's a lot of depth into it, where it looks like the card is actually 3D and like kind of popping out, as opposed to just having one flat image. Today's video is a little bit reversed since I already finished a project here and I'm going to show it to you at the end of the video. This is my very first time making 3D card art, so I wanted to just record my experience and just kind of go over what to expect as someone who's doing this for the very first time. The main reason why I wanted to do this video is because I see a lot of people showing off a lot of these art projects, and whenever anyone asks them specific questions as to how to actually do it, or specific details, they never share them, because I think mainly it's because they do these as art commissions and they charge hundreds of dollars for these, so they don't want to share their secrets on how to do it. But since I'm not trying to make money off of this, I'm gonna go over my experience on how to do it, as well as to just kind of show that it's really not that hard. It's a lot easier than you think it is, and you shouldn't pay these like hundreds of dollars just to get one of these done. Also, as a side note, I also see that a lot of these creators make commissions with charging for LED lighting, and I want to just briefly touch on you shouldn't opt for LED lighting for almost anything, just for the sake of it shouldn't cost you like hundreds or like $50 just for them to add a simple LED light, right? So because what an LED light is, pretty much you just put some sort of string light into whatever you're trying to light up, and most of the time you could probably just drill a hole into whatever you're trying to do, and it's literally just a battery with a switch or something, and then it's just a string light. It costs them less than $5 to do, and they literally just drill a hole in there and glue it in there, and for whatever reason they're gonna charge you like $80-90 just to do something like this. I really don't think you should pay these prices for it. Not to mention, on top of it, most of the time when you do LED lighting, like I have this model kit in my display case for example, you almost most likely will never turn it on aside from once or twice just to take a picture. So avoid that. So I'm going to go over the tools that you need now. The first thing that you'll need to get this done would be a cutting board. The reason why you need a cutting board is because you're going to be using a knife to cut into your cards to cut these squares out, or whichever piece that you need. And if you don't use a cutting board, what you're going to do is you're going to end up cutting through the card and then end up cutting through your table and leaving these scratches or marks on your table, which you're not going to be happy about. And the cutting board is going to be what you're going to be cutting on, so that way when you cut on it, you don't have to worry about your table getting damaged. And then the next thing you're gonna need is an X-Acto knife or a hobby knife. I choose X-Acto because they're just, I guess, higher quality and they just cut better, and I use it for my model building as well too. But I just want to go over that you want to be very, very, very careful using an X-Acto knife, because these things are really, really sharp and they could cut you and you could get hurt. So if you're young, you probably want to have your parents helping you or just teaching you how to use it or supervising you while you're using it, because it takes a lot of pressure for you to hold onto the card, holding onto the knife, and then pushing in and slicing it. So if you don't hold everything down, you could easily, your hand could slip and you could be cutting your finger. And these things are very, very, very sharp, and you could leave cuts in your finger. It's happened to me a couple of times, so be very, very, very careful. Yeah. So be careful using the X-Acto knife, but that's a main tool that you need to cut these things out. The second thing you're going to need is glue. There's going to be two types of glues that you'll probably want. You can probably get away with using just a stick of glue, but I'm going to recommend using super glue as well too. The reason behind it is because when you stack these cards together, you're going to be using, I'll use an example here where the border, you're going to be using the glue stick to glue it on. and then like all these like other parts, you might miss like a corner, right? So when you try to stack them all together and you're gluing it together waiting for it to dry, what happens is you're going to end up having like, you know, parts that will separate, and instead of taking it apart, you could just kind of slip in like a super glue and just glue in these parts, so that way you don't have to do the whole thing again. And then the last thing you're going to need is going to be a brush type pen, like a black color. And what the pen is going to be for these brushes is, you see these white edges, you're going to be using it to color them black, so that way when you stack them together, you're not going to notice it. On top of that, the reason why you want to color these parts black, as well as any other part that you cut out black as well, is sort of like drawing, when you draw shadows on things to make it more realistic. When you color these borders in, it kind of gives it that 3D effect where it gives it a little bit more depth, so it looks like it's popping out. And the last thing I'm going to go over on what you need is, you're going to need common cards as well as your base card that you're working with. So the base card that you're working with is the card art that you want to make 3D, right? And you're going to want around, I would say, between 5 to 10 copies of it, because, you know, just to give yourself a little bit more leeway in regards to room for error. And then when you're choosing the cards that you're going to use as kind of spacers, what spacer means is that between every card, so every layer is going to have like a bunch of cards in between to give it a little bit more depth, so that way it looks 3D. And you're going to want like a stack of these, probably like as many as you can get, so that way you have a little bit more leeway. So what I would probably say is like roughly around like, I don't know, like 3 to 5 cards minimum in between each layer. And then when you're choosing these, you want to be careful, because you see how the Trapinch has no kind of like anything around the border. The cards you want to choose is, you want to have like the ones that are the same exact ones with no like kind of like weird border to it. And then I'll use the Cosmoem for example. Like, you don't want like a stamp on the corner, you don't want the evolutions on the corner as well too, because when you cut it out, you won't have the same kind of frame and it'll look kind of off as well too. So you don't want to do that. You want to choose the ones with the same backing. And this works the same for Yu-Gi-Oh cards as well too, where most of the cards have the same border, but certain cards like pendulum cards will have like different borders as well too. They might be wider, so you wouldn't be able to use those as, you know, backings or like, you know, the spacers. One thing I also wanted to touch on was that although it's not exactly really hard to do this, the main thing is it takes a lot of time. So I chose like a really basic card, Trapinch for example, and it still took me like maybe like 5 to 6 hours to do. But of course, this might be my first time doing it. It might be faster next time. But if you have more complicated cards, you could take a lot more time than that, like maybe like 8-9 hours or something. And what I would recommend is set aside time to do this. Don't try to make this like a one-day project. You know, space it out, do it bit by bit, and then, you know, you'll have a lot more fun that way. So we went over what you need, how much time you have to set aside, what to look out for, right? So how do we actually do this? The first thing you have to do is you have to plan. Every card is different, and I'm going to use the Trapinch again as an example since I'm doing this one as a project. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at every card, and every card is going to be different. Some might be easier, some might be harder. In the Trapinch, for example, they kind of already do the work for you, right? It's pretty easy to figure out. So they already have one layer where Trapinch is in the foreground and the front. And then you're going to see in the back, there's going to be another sand dune. And in the back, there's even more sand dunes. There's going to be the stars, the moon, and whatever, right? So you already kind of have an idea, okay, I'm going to first cut out the first layer, which is going to be the Trapinch or the first sand dune that he's standing on. And the second layer in the back is going to be that huge sand dune over there. And the last layer might be, you know, these two sand dunes in the back that are darkly colored. And then maybe in the back here, if you really wanted to do it, you could make these stars or moon stand out as well too. And it's going to be different for every other card as well too, right? Some might be a little bit harder. I'm going to try to choose another one to give an example of, just to kind of go over like the thought process. This one's pretty easy. Okay. So this penguin card, you're going to see, okay, so there's the glacier here in the front, a glacier here on the side, and then a glacier here in the back here in the middle. and then the glacier is here in the back, and then the penguin right in the middle. So you can kind of get an idea, okay, this is going to be the first layer. This could be on the first layer or the second layer. And then this could be somewhere in between. And this could be somewhere behind him. And this could go even further behind him. And then this layer could be even further. So you get the point, right? So you already have an idea of how you're going to cut it out. And then you're going to slowly cut out pieces and pieces based on that. And then when you piece them together, you'll kind of have an idea of how to actually do it. So next I'm going to go over the videos on when I recorded my process of actually doing this and kind of like my thought process on how I did the Trapinch. Alright, so this is going to be a video on how to do 3D card art. And it's sort of like also my journey on learning it myself as well too. My end goal is going to be, I want to do a 3D card art of a Stardust Dragon. And I kind of have an idea of how I want to do it. I'm just waiting for a bunch of comments from Toon Chaos in order to do it, and then going from there. It's a little bit more complicated since there's a lot more details on a Stardust Dragon. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start off with a Trapinch. So this is what I probably recommend other people doing as well too, as well as other tutorials where if you're just starting off, you're probably better off trying using really basic cards that you might not really care about too much. And I kind of had a bunch of comments of Trapinch to begin with anyways, because I kind of had an idea of doing this like almost a year and a half ago, but I just never went through with it. But now I kind of have the free time, so I'm going to do it. I kind of got a little bit started here already. As you see, I already cut out like some comments and the outline of it. So the main thing is you need to start off with a game plan. And because you could watch tutorials of other people doing it, but it's a little bit different depending on what card you're using and what's actually in the card art itself. So for example, with the Lopup, you would have a layer of the grass in the front, and then you see how there's an extra layer of the grassland in the back, and then you have him standing there, right? And it's different with every single card. So for example, with the Trapinch, it might not turn out the best because I really don't know how it's going to turn out, but what I'm going to do is with the Trapinch is I'm going to use, I already cut out the first layer, which is going to be him standing there. So you already see, kind of have an idea of what I'm going to do. And then you see how there's like another layer of the mountains in the back. I'm going to cut that out as well too and try to make it so it looks a little bit more 3D. So that's kind of like my idea of it, as well as those mountains in the back. The main thing I realize when it comes to doing this is that you kind of have to be you want to start off with common cards, because what happens is it takes a lot of hand practice in order to actually do this, where you see here, if I get to focus, it might not be completely exact when it comes to it. And what I'm going to do is actually color it in, and after I'm done coloring it with like a pen or something like that on the edges, then I'm going to do like another video clip on what happens after this. But so far, what I would say is you probably don't have to actually clean up the edges too much, because as you see here, I already cut out a layer of a Trapinch card without doing that, right? As long as you just color it in, I think you could pretty much hide a lot of the, like, you know, the little flaws and whatnot, and then we'll go from there. So my game plan is making it a little bit thicker in the front, so you have kind of like that 3D effect, and slowly work my way back. And I'm have a couple more layers of these, you know, spacers between the cards, and then I'm gonna have one more base line on the back. So first I'm gonna cut out a little bit more spacers, and I'm gonna cut the video here, and then we're gonna continue there. So as I learn how to do this, I just want to set the expectation for everyone that wants to do this, that you want to do this in small segments, and you don't want to try to assume that you're gonna do everything all in one day. The reason behind it is because cutting a majority of the work is pretty much cutting out the borders. So pretty much cutting out the square out of the card, and then what you end up with is these, which will be the spacing that will give it the 3D effect. But the thing is, it requires actually a lot of hand strength in order to do it. So aside from just the fact that you're just cutting it's easy, you're gonna have to make the line with the X-Acto knife on the square over and over and over again, and you're doing this with like multiple cards depending on how thick you want it to be. By the end of this, I'll kind of have an idea now. Before I glue everything together, I'll kind of let you guys know how many cards I use, so we'll go from there. One thing I also wanted to point out too as well is that while you're cutting these borders out, you don't have to worry too much about being perfect, for example. So you see how like I did like some nicks and there's like, you know, pieces of the border left in there. If the camera focus, I think it's focusing on these. So you see how like there's pieces of the border left in there. It's just not very clean at all. The thing is, you have to realize is with a whole bunch of these stacked together, you don't really notice it at all. So let me just stack these together just to show you. So again, you see here, once they're stacked together, you don't really notice it. And especially since what you're going to do later on is you'll most likely color in the borders here on the edges with black marker, which I'll kind of show what it'll look like afterwards. But, and then one other thing I wanted to point out too is I got a little bit caught up with how sometimes like it's not clean or whatever it is. What I realized is what you could do is once you have these together, what you could do is you could use your nails and just kind of like scratch it a little bit and just kind of clean it up once you have like a whole stack of them, and then they'll end up being a lot more clean afterwards. Alright, so that's pretty much it, and then we'll move to the next step once we get a lot more of these borders. So as I get further into this and I'm kind of getting towards the end, I want to point out one thing is work smarter, not harder, right? That's always applies to most things in life. So one thing I realize is as you have a front layer like this where I have the Trapinch here and it has like this bottom border that covers everything, right? I realize that as I continue on, because it has this bottom border, every single other piece in the back, I could get really, really lazy and not even fully cut it because when I put it all together, you're not going to see the bottom. So you don't have to worry so much about, you know, cutting it perfectly towards the end. I would probably say that the ones that you really want to have in the front is the ones that you have the most clean. So that way you have these like clean borders. It looks a little bit better. So the most important part would probably be the front card. And just to kind of update as I go along as well too. So I already cut the mountain in the back out. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to have a lot more spacers now in the back to kind of like separate them and give it kind of like a more 3D effect. I'm kind of getting there, but one thing I'm kind of thinking about, which I'll kind of update in the next part, would be if I want to cut out the Trapinch's head on this part. So that way, I guess when you look at the side, you're not going to see that Trapinch there. One other option I do have as well too is if I color it in with black. So that way it's like some sort of shadow. But let's just see first. Alright, so I'm at the kind of the final part of this, and one thing I wanted to point out as well too was that I realized that however I wanted to use my backing, if, let's just say, I wanted to use the Trapinch, the full art, and on the back, if I don't darken it with a shadow or color it in, you'll see that it still leaks in there where you'll kind of see like, okay, it's in the back, right? That orange. But if you were to color it in, it's pretty much like a shadow and you don't notice it anymore. And even if you do like a really crappy job or whatever it is, it's not really that noticeable. I probably would recommend like a black Sharpie or some kind of permanent marker. I still haven't darkened the edges yet. And then one other thing that I decided on as well too was I ended up, for the middle Trapinch, I actually cut off the head. So that way we only have one of them standing out. Alright, so I'm going to darken the edges now. And let's see how the final product turns out. Alright, as I finish up, I just wanted to point out some things I realized as I was doing this was, so with the cards that you do, right? So since there's a layer and you are coloring the border, again, you probably use a black Sharpie or whatever black marker you have. In this case, I just use like a Gundam brush marker. A brush type would probably be the best. Nothing too liquidy. So before I glue this together, I just want to show one thing you want to point out is when you look into it, if you don't color the borders correctly, what you'll see is you'll see like a lot of like spots that are white and whatnot, and that's when you didn't cut the borders like perfectly, so it shows, right? So as I go further back, you see that I don't have to worry about coloring the bottom border because I have all the bottom parts covered up. So if you're using a front layer like I am doing, where I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers in the front, then you want to make sure these front 7 layers look really good and they're colored in, so that way like it's not too apparent that, you know, the borders aren't colored in, so it looks a little bit neater. So I'm going to try to touch it up as much as possible, but I just want to show pretty much in general before I glue it together how many layers this exactly has. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So seven layers there in the front. I'm using the Trapinch on the front cutout. So in total, I think I only use like 4 or 5 of the Trapinch cards, the actual subject of the card. And then after the main layer, let's see how many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I had 8 layers after the first layer to give it like a little bit more depth to it. Okay. After the 8 layers, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So only 4 cards in between. So this is how it turned out. I guess technically you don't have to have a backing, but I prefer it a little bit more. And after that, I have another Trapinch. I had 2 just because I ended up cutting it, but I don't think it really made that big of a difference. And this was for the mountains in the back. And there's 1, 2, 3. So I only did 3 more layers, and then in the back here is just like a bunch of random cards just to make it a little bit thicker, so it's not too thin. And I just blotted out the face so that way it gives it a little bit of a shadow. But you'll see that when everything comes together, it looks like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up gluing this together and then putting something really heavy on top of it overnight, so that way it just like sticks together, and then we'll see the final results afterwards.
A few moments later.
Alright, so after having a whole graveyard of these cards that I sacrificed in order to get this done, this is how it finally turned out. Alright, so we're finally done, and it came out a lot better than I actually expected. Main takeaways and things I learned. The one thing I would probably say is for the cards where you're cutting out the borders, I would probably recommend, depending on how you work and what you prefer, to just do that first and cut out like at least like 20 or 30 of them. So that way in the middle of doing this project, you could kind of just use them so you're not stopping between, so you could focus on actually, you know, doing the actual card yourself. And then the second takeaway would probably be that you want to not be lazy with coloring a lot of these borders with your marker or pen, because what happens is if you don't color them in properly, you'll see a lot of these like white parts leak through, and that probably could have been solved if I actually colored in these borders like way ahead of time. The card in the front you probably don't want to color it in, but the cards in the back you won't see it, right? So if you color them in, it'll look a lot more clean. As for the actual spacers and how many you actually need, so at the end of it, I ended up using only 5 Trapinches as the base card that I need, like for the actual background, and then the actual spacers in betweens, I would say I use around minimum of 5 to 7 each. And some of them I might have used even like 8, 9, or 10 of them, because what I realize is what really gives this like the 3D-ish effect is the more spacers you use, the more cards in between each layer, you're gonna get a better effect. And you'll see, like, I actually made some mistakes here where you'll see I actually have like 2 mountains here where I actually made a mistake and cut an extra one, but I was like, you know what, let me just put that in. And sometimes that's another thing I want to touch on as well too, right? Sometimes if you make a mistake, it's what makes your piece unique, right? At the end of the day, it's kind of like an arts and craft project where you don't have to copy someone else on how they do it, because everyone's gonna think on how to do it a little bit differently. For example, like, I thought of it this way where I wanted the first layer of the Trapinch, and then maybe someone else would be like, you know what, I want to add extra layers and make that sand 3D. Or another idea I had was, if I cut out these like wavy effects where it's supposed to be like wind blowing through, maybe I could have cut that out and, you know, attached it to some of the back layers to give it a more 3D effect as well on top of everything. Or add some kind of like, you know, plastic there to make the moon, you know, more vibrant, or the stars or something like that, right? It's endless. Everyone does it a different way, so you don't have to, like, you know, get caught up on, oh, someone did it this way, so I'm going to try to copy them exactly, because you're going to have a different idea and thought process as is someone else. So don't get too caught up on that. The main thing I would probably say is set aside your time. Don't try. I actually did this in one sitting, but don't try to do it in one sitting. I would recommend, you know, kind of separating out. Okay, do layer by layer. Maybe one day you'll cut out all the spacer cards that you're going to use in between, and another day you're going to work on the first layer to see how it goes, and then go from there. Every card's going to have, like, you know, a different difficulty level, which is why I chose the Trapinch first. For me, it seemed a little bit basic, so I thought this was like a good project to start on before I start trying to do the Stardust Dragon, and then we'll go from there. Aside from that, thank you for watching, and thank you everyone that's been subscribing to the channel. I hope you enjoy the stuff that I've been making. And hopefully within, I don't know, the next month or the next couple months, I'll be doing the Stardust Dragon, which is a little bit trickier because it does have like the hollow background and it's way more detailed than the Trapinch. So we'll see how that goes, and then I'll see if I'll make a video on it. Thank you for watching again.